The Supreme Court heard two death penalty cases this session. In Bays v. Reese, the court lifted a de facto moratorium on the death penalty by rejecting the argument that lethal injection is cruel and unusual punishment. The second case, Snyder v. Louisiana, went the other way, with a 7-2 decision that a Louisiana man was denied a fair trial because the prosecutor had struck every black juror. The lawyer who won that case was renowned defense attorney Stephen Bright. With 30 years of experience defending death row inmates, Bright says now is the time to re-examine the death penalty.
I think we're going to see between now and the end of 2008 probably the greatest concentration of executions that we've had in the last 40 years.
Why is that?
Well, many cases have been backed up while the Supreme Court decided the case about lethal injection. And so we've had basically about 7 months during which there were not any executions. And so the result now is that you have a state like Texas with almost 50 people lined up to be executed, and other states with 5 to 10 people. So we're going to see quite a few executions in a fairly concentrated period of time.
Since the death penalty was reinstated by the Supreme Court in 1976, has it accomplished anything?
Well, I think that's the big question. And you look at those who have really studied it, and I think one of the most thorough examinations was in New Jersey, which recommended with only one dissenting vote, which was a state legislator, that they repeal the death penalty in New Jersey, that it just simply cost too much, that there was really nothing much to show for it at the end of the day, that it was re-victimizing people whose loved ones had been killed and who have this long period of time while the cases are being reviewed. Often the cases are reversed, so they have to go back and do it again. And there's life imprisonment now without possibility of parole in every state that has the death penalty except New Mexico.
Since it was repealed in New Jersey, has the murder rate increased?
Well, it was only repealed in January, so it's a fairly short period of time, but I don't think it has. 13 other states, even before New Jersey, that didn't have the death penalty. And there's some states like Michigan and Minnesota, Wisconsin, have not had the death penalty for years, since the 1800s.
You just brought a case to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And can you tell me about the case?
Alan Snyder was sentenced to death in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. It's sort of your classic death penalty prosecution. It's sort of white flight, suburban New Orleans. Jefferson Parish got some national attention right after Katrina because the police officers were stationed at the bridge so that people fleeing Katrina from New Orleans could not come into Jefferson Parish, could not cross the bridge. David Duke, the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, represented it in the legislature. And in Allen's case, as in a lot of cases in that parish, the prosecutor used his discretionary strikes in picking the jury to exclude all the black people. There were 5. And when the jury was being picked, he struck all 5. So here's an African-American man accused of a crime against another African-American man tried by an all-white jury in this parish. And so the issue really was there racial discrimination in picking the jury? And the Supreme Court said there was.
Where are we in the process of abolishing the death penalty?
Well, it's interesting. 5 states account for about 65% of all the executions. So the death penalty, to some extent, already is limited to a fairly small number of jurisdictions. Just like the death penalty in the world is limited to a fairly small number of countries. Most industrialized countries no longer have the death penalty. About 90% of the death penalties imposed in the world are imposed by China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United States of America.
You spend your life fighting for clients to prevent them from receiving the death penalty, but what outcome do you want for them?
Well, in most of the cases I have, the only alternative is life imprisonment without any possibility of parole. We're not talking about people going home. If the people are guilty of the crimes, probably the best sentence they're going to receive is life imprisonment without any possibility of parole. And one of the points I make is that, we're not suggesting anybody being released or getting the key to the city. The question is, what's the best punishment to administer in this situation? And a lot of people talk about the death penalty as giving people closure, giving the families closure. Actually, the death penalty does the exact opposite. Because the cases go on for 10 or 12 years, they may get reversed and be tried again. But a case that's resolved with the person going to prison for the rest of their life is going to let the family get on with their life, is going to protect the community from that person.
Why is life in prison without parole more humane than the death penalty?
Well, some people would argue that life in prison without parole is not, that it's a greater punishment. One of the things that I think is important about this, though, is we've had all these exonerations. All these people convicted, gone off to prison, some of them freed only because of the development of DNA evidence, which of course didn't exist only a few years ago. And I think it's been very sobering for a lot of people. I've known all along that juries can make mistakes. I mean, it's a human institution. I mean, lots of times one person swears one thing happens, another person swears another thing happens. I mean, it's better than fighting duels, but it's certainly not infallible. And we've realized that now. And at least if we find out we've made a mistake, we can give the person back the rest of their life. We can't do anything about the years we've taken away. And some people have been in 20, 30 years before they've been exonerated. But the extinguishing their life, of course, then there's obviously nothing we can ever do if we do find out we've made a mistake later on.
So A or B?
Oh, we're going to now do A and B. Okay, great. I can hardly wait. Okay.
Woody Guthrie or Johnny Cash?
Woody Guthrie.
Prosecutorial misconduct or ineffective assistance of counsel?
Ineffective assistance of counsel is a much more widespread problem.
Georgia or Alabama?
Georgia.
Why?
Well, Alabama is a state that probably sentences more people to death per capita than any state, or certainly it's one of the top 2 or 3. The criminal justice system in Alabama is a complete farce.
Kentucky Wildcats or Louisville Cardinals?
Oh, Kentucky Wildcats.
Elected judges or court-appointed defense lawyers?
Court-appointed lawyers, I guess.
Why?
Well, we need an independent judiciary. I would feel more comfortable with court-appointed lawyers. I don't think lawyers should be appointed by the court, and I don't think judges should be involved in any way in the defense of cases. That's not their role.
The NAACP Legal Defense Fund or the Southern Poverty Law Center?
The NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
Why?
Well, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund was started by Thurgood Marshall. It's been one of the great civil rights law firms in this country. The Southern Poverty Law Center is basically a direct mail fundraising operation that I think is really almost a fraud on the public.
Scalia or Alito?
Alito.
Why?
Well, I think there's some hope for Justice Alito as to be a fair member of the court. I am so disappointed in Justice Scalia, who really takes a position in the cases and comes out as a member of the Supreme Court and argues the case for one side or the other by the questions he asks, by the way he treats the lawyers. That's not what judges are supposed to do.
Ani DeFranco or Joan Baez?
Ani DeFranco.
Clinton or Obama?
Oh, Obama, unquestionably.
Why?
I think the election of Barack Obama would do more for the image of the United States, which couldn't be lower in the world. I can't imagine anything that would change that more than the election of Barack Obama as President of the United States.
Last but not least, mob logic or a trip to the county jail?
Oh, mob logic, certainly any day.